Buenos días para todos.
Good morning, everyone. As Gaston said, the world is changing very quickly. And Gaston was focusing on what the applications need to have nowadays, what they need to have in order to cover the changes. And now I'm going to tell you what we are doing, how we see the way in which we can combine various tools and processes from GeneXus to make these applications. So Gaston was describing the what, and during this presentation I'm going to talk about the how. In GeneXus we have 2 or 3 fundamental things, 2 or 3 general guidelines. And one of them is that we always focus in modeling. GeneXus has been defined as a modeling tool. It's not about writing one thing after the other. It's about modeling reality, so much so that you can generate on the basis of what you model. In modeling, as Gaston said, we always have the database, we model also the functioning, and we need to model, especially recently, the design. In the past, we used to make systems for the users in our own company, and today, in the opposite end, we are making applications for our users. And in many cases, also, the business is defined by the application itself. So it's not just about a user who doesn't like something and he becomes an unhappy user. If he does not like it, I don't have a user and I don't have a business. This is a matter that is becoming more and more relevant, and that is why we consider it so important, and we are working on it. Gaston talked about patterns and basic styles, etc., and I would like to stress one of the things we're doing in modeling. I would like to stop on this object, which is a new one. It's called stencil. And if you look at it, it's like a panel that groups various controls. It's a way of grouping controls with certain properties, some layouts, certain colors. But unlike a panel, what we are defining in these objects is just the visual part and not the data. The data can be in another panel. That's something that I can do with this object. I can use this stencil and associate some data to the stencil later on. So if I want to define how I want this stencil to look when I'm going to show a match in this application, and this is an example taken from the World Cup contest, then we have the match, the teams that played, the result of the match, etc. So we are decoupling the data from the stencil, and the stencil can be used in various panels, even panels that are for the web or for the... And in each case, there is an instance for the data. The important thing is that the data are decoupled, and the concerns too. Those who are in charge of this are concerned about the visual representation and not about the other aspect. And since it's a separate object, we have a different kind of traceability, what was changed and when. And we have a way of sharing it by sharing this part separately from the data. So I think that this is an object that has become very important for our work and for the design. Now coming back to design, we need what we said a minute ago, the colors, the margins, whether we put things horizontally or vertically, or separate, or spread, or not. And for us engineers, it's kind of difficult sometimes. So we need to get more into this work. We need to learn more, be more concerned about these aspects, And since we live in ecosystems now, we need to get in touch with people who do know about this, that is to say, the designers. The designers usually like to employ their own tools. It can be Photoshop or InVision, and this one is widely used. It's called Sketch, and it's a tool that had been made for the designers. They are used to working with the sketches, and they have there all of the tools that they normally employ for this kind of thing. In GeneXus, what we are doing is importing to our knowledge base a design made in a sketch, but importing not in the sense of just bringing the file, but importing in the sense of converting it to the representation we need in GeneXus. So on the basis of a sketch made by the designer, inside the knowledge KB we can obtain panels, images, stencils, colors, etc. Because the alternative was I would receive this from the designer and started to say, oh well, in this case he uses blue, so I need to have a square in blue, etc. Now we're doing it directly. So we have the design on the one hand. There are going to be presentations about this matter by Paolo Michelini and Mauro Granciano. But Gaston also talked about the multi-experience. We are talking about the simple experience to the multiple experience and multiple devices. And this affects us too. It affects GeneXus as a development tool. That is why we're also working on this that we mentioned at some point, what we call GeneXus M. It's an IDE from GeneXus, and it's multi-platform. You can download it and execute it very quickly in a Windows or in a Mac or in a Linux computer. The important thing, let me show you, a transaction. The important thing I was saying is that on the one hand it's a multi-platform, and on the other hand it's very light. It's been built in such a way that it's very easy to download it and execute it. The addition, this light component, is separated from the back end where the storage of the knowledge base is made, and as well as the build, which is executed in a separate machine in a back end. So we have a light client, and we can have all of the power in a server. The GeneXus server, if you have it, can act as a backend of this light client, which is multi-platform. On the other hand, what happens is that we are changing the architecture, which facilitates us to grow the growth in APIs and services for integration with other kinds of platforms, technologies, etc., and the backend. So we have the facilities to design and for the development that we usually have with GeneXus, as well as tools that allow us to have the experience of a multi-platform. And finally, what we have with all this, besides the modeling, it's a series of knowledge, which is one of the big pillars of GeneXus. We vibrate on modeling, and what we model is knowledge. We don't want to model data, we want to model knowledge. Working with GeneXus, we create a lot of knowledge, and it's important that this knowledge is not generated again and again. It's fundamental that we have a way of reusing knowledge and sharing it. From the beginning, in GeneXus, we've had a technology known as Knowledge Manager as a way of exporting objects and knowledge to others, and we have done many things with regard to sharing knowledge. For example, the marketplace, where you can share extensions, controls, patterns, or GeneXus servers which has shared KBs, etc. But we think that we have to go further. Today's world requires all this, but at another level, on another degree. And this is what we know as GeneXus knowledge matrix. In this matrix, there are three important things. It has to be easy to share things, to discover them, and to integrate them. Let's analyze each one. What kind of knowledge are we talking to when we intend to share, discover, and integrate it? Firstly, we can share objects. That's the easiest thing. Components. I have a procedure that calculates, for example, the payroll, and this is something I can easily share with someone else. Besides the way of sharing this explicitly in a package, we also want a way of sharing it in a more natural way, more integrated in the workflow. So I can explicitly export the object and send it to someone else, but also I can say I'm going to share this object in a knowledge matrix so that if someone needs it at a certain point, it can be found, or it can even be shared as a declaration and can say all of the objects in this KB can be interesting for someone, and so I declare that they are shared. Or I can say the objects that are in the KB in my GeneXus server are also shared. In that manner, someone else can find them. The next level has to do not with loose components, but with components that have been orchestrated or designed to fulfill a certain function. For example, the SDK of Mercado Libre, or I can have a module for invoicing, and it's another level of things that we can share in that knowledge matrix. And this can help us in the way in which objects relate to each other. When we discover something, there can be a much more natural way of doing the discovery in the knowledge matrix. Instead of knowing that I have to go somewhere to look for a certain thing, we could have things integrated in my own flow. So when I'm creating a transaction and I indicate currency in the transaction, I get a suggestion that maybe it would be good for me or interesting to bring in the domain where the currencies are defined, or a procedure that calculates rates and other things related to currencies. So the discovery is already integrated. It's not something I have to do. And then the following level is complete KBs. We are used to them, and we have the GeneXus servers that expose complete KBs. That's an example. Or enterprises that sell ready-to-use KBs. But again, with regard to discovery, when I'm creating, for example, an object like a currency, it can offer me to create, on the basis of a different transaction called currency, which is in another KB, something else. These are things on which we are already working and they are available. Or maybe we want to explore the transactions in the original KBs and see how they are related with products and attributes, etc. In every case, something else we want to make easier is integration. I was showing you the stencils. When I'm going to create a stencil, if there are stencils that are in other KB and have been shared, they will appear as available to me. And when I select one, I can ask that it is integrated in my KB, and the integration will be much more natural and fluid. So underneath, as Gaston said, there is the user interface that you don't see. Underneath, GeneXus will ask to whoever has the original stencil to export it and disseminate it, and on the basis of that stencil, GeneXus will create objects inside the KB. And I myself, the only thing I said was I want to use this stencil. And finally, the final level is the applications. It's knowledge. Someone may be exposing directly an application that works in such and such a way, and this person will see maybe you can create an instance for this application with such and such characteristics, and maybe on that basis they will say you can also have the KB from which it was created or not. So this is a vision that we have, something on which we have been working and are working a lot. Gonzalo Arcos is going to make a presentation where he will give much more details about this process. So we are talking about modeling, we're talking about knowing, we integrate knowledge, we share knowledge, but finally all this is dedicated to the third pillar, which is making applications. So building means for us the design, the modeling, and this will lead to the build. But the world has changed, and it's not just about developing for 2 or 3 months something and then build it and packaging it and releasing it. Now the process is continuous. We need to be in a continuous cycle of development and operations, because we are developing and testing and updating things all the time. This cycle of continuous integration or continuous deployment is the one on which we have been working. And in GeneXus, firstly, we have integrated with continuous integration tools. We did it several years ago for cruise control. This tool is still operating. Cruise control is a tool that is still functioning, and internally we use it for many things. We know that there are many companies in the community that are using it too. This product has not developed further or evolved throughout the years. These last years it has not changed, and there are many other systems of continuous integration, and one of the strongest is the Butler Jenkins. There are many out there, but this one is one of the strongest. So we introduced Jenkins to GeneXus. What do I mean by introducing? Well, the typical case of these tools is that a project is defined and you say what is the code repository, what kind of build you want to do when there is a change in the code's repository, and what are the credentials for connecting. The typical case is to check whether there were changes and to do a build. Now with these tools, when you develop or define a project, you are asked what is the source code management, what is the code repository that will be used. The plugin we did for Jenkins allows us to do the following. Jenkins recognizes a Git or Subverser repository, and then the GeneXus server option also appears. So you say, well, my code repository is a GeneXus server, and inside this server it's such a KB environment version, these are my credentials, and with this Jenkins has the capacity of connecting with that repository. In the same manner, when you want to define a build step, you can say you have to do the build on the basis of this KB, this version, this environment, maybe some other property, I want it with force rebuild or not, that kind of thing. So this is the first thing. Inside Jenkins, you introduce GeneXus so that Jenkins can work with a GeneXus server and a GeneXus to do the build. But there is integration in the opposite manner, that GeneXus tools can easily interact with the other continuous integration tools. So this is the evolution of GeneXus server. Traditionally, GeneXus server would cover the SCM part. It was a code repository. Instead of text archives, which is the typical case, these were GeneXus knowledge bases, and instead of text archive, it would be transactors or panels, etc. This is where we're going, defining a GeneXus server in a larger sense, not as a part of SCM, but as a part of other things. For example, nowadays with the GeneXus server, we have also integrated the backend, which is a functionality which could be used with GeneXus M. And also we can integrate things from build. I can say in the same console of a GeneXus server or from the same GeneXus, I have a KB published in GeneXus server, and I also want that the KB in question, that every time there is a new commit, a build process is executed, and it's integrated with the GeneXus server. It can be done by going to Jenkins and configuring everything, but now I can have a unified vision in the GeneXus server. I see the the KB, the build processes that have been triggered, whether they have worked or not, whether they failed. So I can have a different kind of integration. If there is an error, I can see the object that led to the error. I can see that kind of integration. Now, it doesn't finish with the build. Besides the build, I have to do other things. I have to do testing. We integrate on the side of GeneXus the unit test, which is now one of the objects inside the KB, but in the build process that we are orchestrating in the GeneXus server, we can also orchestrate that once the build is triggered, if it was successful, certain tests are executed. And they can be of different kinds: unitary, functional, security diagnosis. They can be different kinds of tests, and we will have the possibility of defining, for example, for the builds that are done during the day, a certain kind of test, but in the night we can execute stronger tests, or maybe if I have to do a significant update, I can execute even stronger tests. Now, if we come this far but we have not deployed it, it's of no use. So the other leg that we can automate is the deploy. The GeneXus cloud team and GeneXus have been working a lot on the automation of the packaging and the deploy to various platforms. And so it's the kind of thing on which we want to concentrate in order to extend the server as a platform for orchestrating all these things. There may be others, but these are the tasks or stages that we see in continuous integration or continuous deployment. But there may be others like a review or other kinds of tasks, and our idea is that there is a platform which would be this GeneXus server, and which would allow us to integrate very easily all these kinds of things. So this is what we're working on. There will be another presentation by Oscar Fabricio, if I'm not mistaken, this afternoon, and he will be showing things about GeneXus Cloud, deployment, integration with Jenkins from the side of GeneXus server. So to sum up, the things that have to do with modeling, others to have to do with knowing, but the most important thing has to do with doing. And these three things can be seen from a different point of view. This presentation shows what we have been modeling, so as to know how we are going to do the applications in the current world. We wanted to show you what we have been doing, and what's left is benefit from all this to do things, because as Nicolas said, our community has the capacity of doing, and that's one of its main features. Thank you.